swore to Mary.
You swore to the living once too.
Think you can handle us all. The sisters surrounded the cowboy before the dawn gunfight. In the summer of 1877, in the fledgling territory of Blackwood Creek, an unforgiving sun blazed down on a landscape of cracked red earth and skeletal Joshua trees. The air, thick with the scent of dust and sagebrush, shimmered with heat that had long since baked the life out of the ground. By day, the silence was broken only by the mournful shriek of a hawk circling high overhead, its shadow a fleeting whisper across the desolate terrain. As twilight bled across the sky, painting the horizon in hues of bruised violet and blood orange, a different kind of hush fell, one that tasted of loneliness. I stood on the porch of my isolated homestead, a man etched with the geography of grief. At 32, my eyes held the weary wisdom of a century, and the lines carved around them were not from laughter but from squinting against endless sun and holding back tears that never came. I was a man defined by what I had lost: a father, a brother, a mother, all claimed by the cholera that had swept through 3 winters ago. I had buried them myself, the silence of their passing louder than any storm. My days were a monotonous rhythm of survival, a solitary dance with a landscape that seemed to reflect my own emotional wasteland. The routine, a fragile anchor in my sea of solitude, was shattered by a sound that had no place in this barren quiet. It wasn't the wind, nor the rustle of a scorpion across the porch floorboards. It was the frantic, desperate clip-clop of a horse at a full gallop, followed by the sickening splintering of wood and a cry of pure, human agony. The sound came from the West Canyon Trail, a treacherous path nobody dared to travel after dark. My hand, calloused and quick, instinctively went for the rifle propped against the doorframe. My heart, long dormant, thrummed with a primal mix of dread and reluctant obligation. The choice was not a matter of courage, but of a quiet, unshakable decency I had almost forgotten I possessed. Without a moment's hesitation, I left the relative safety of my porch and moved into the encroaching darkness, drawn by a sound that promised to change everything. There's an emptiness to my heart when all I have left are memories and a plot of land where my family lies buried. My days are a monotonous drone of sun-up to sundown, each one a grim reflection of the last. It's a lonely, soul-crushing existence, a life I've accepted as my penance for surviving when they didn't. The wind whispers their names through the cracks of my shack, a mournful song that no one else can hear. I eat alone, work alone, and stand at this fence post every evening to watch the sun set, its fiery end, a silent echo of the fire that went out inside of me. I am a ghost in a land of ghosts, haunted by the past, with no hope for a future. The Wild West is full of men like me, drifters and loners, their spirits broken by loss, and their souls too weary to mend. But maybe, just maybe, there's a different path for a man who has lost everything. Maybe in the face of a storm, something new can be born from the dust. Thunder cracked overhead, so sudden and violent that even I flinched. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, creating tiny craters in the dust. Within moments, the drops became a deluge. Wind slammed into the barn with enough force to make the entire structure groan. I worked quickly, checking that all the horses were secure in their stalls, that the feed was covered, that nothing loose could become a projectile in the gale. I was about to head back to the main house when I heard a faint voice, barely audible above the storm's fury. I froze, hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 holstered at my hip. Visitors during a storm like this meant trouble. Nobody traveled in weather like this unless they had no choice. The barn door burst open, slamming against the wall. 3 figures stumbled inside, soaked to the bone and gasping for breath. Women. My hand relaxed slightly on my gun, but didn't move away entirely. In the lamplight, I could make out their faces. All 3 bore a family resemblance, clearly sisters. The eldest looked to be in her late 22s, with dark hair plastered to her head and fierce brown eyes that swept the barn before settling on me. She stood protectively in front of the other 2, chin raised despite her bedraggled state. Her dress, once perhaps blue or gray, was torn at the hem, and stained with mud. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite the chattering of her teeth. "We just need shelter from the storm. We mean no harm." The second sister, perhaps 25, pushed wet auburn curls from her face. Where the eldest was all sharp angles and defensive posture, this one had a softer look until I met her eyes. There was something wild there, something that reminded me of an unbroken horse. Her dress was in worse shape than her sister's, patched in multiple places and missing buttons. The youngest couldn't have been more than 20, with the same brown eyes as her eldest sister, but none of the hardness. She clung to the middle sister's arm, shivering violently. Her pale blue dress might once have been fine, but now it hung on her thin frame like a shroud. I studied them for a long moment. Everything about them screamed trouble. The torn clothes, the exhaustion evident in their postures, the way the eldest kept glancing toward the door as if expecting pursuit. But the code of the frontier was clear. You didn't turn away folks in need, especially not during a storm that could kill. "There's hay in the loft," I said finally, jerking my head toward the ladder. "It's dry up there. You can wait out the storm." The eldest sister's shoulders sagged slightly with relief. "Thank you. We're grateful. Name's Lucas Blackwood. This is my place." I didn't phrase it as a question, but the expectation hung in the air between us. The sisters exchanged glances. The eldest straightened. "I'm Delia. These are my sisters, Clara and Evangeline." False names. I was certain of it. The slight hesitation, the way Delia's eyes didn't quite meet mine when she spoke, but then plenty of folks in the territory had reasons for not using their real names. I myself had known men who'd left everything behind, including their identities, to start fresh in the unforgiving landscape of the West. "There's a pump out back for water," I said. "I'll bring some blankets from the house." "That's kind of you, but—" Delia began. "Wasn't a question." I cut her off. "You'll catch your death in those wet clothes." I left before she could protest further, jogging through the rain to the main house. Inside, I grabbed an armful of blankets and my mother's old medicine box. On second thought, I added some bread and dried beef from my stores. Whatever these women were running from, they looked like they hadn't eaten properly in days. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, and a silence hung over the ranch that was far more unnerving than the storm's fury. The rain had subsided, leaving the world a slick, muddy mess, but the real storm, the one that had followed these women, was still out there. I had a feeling it would come looking, and when it did, it wouldn't be as polite as the weather. I watched them from the porch, a silent sentinel with my rifle across my lap. They were huddled in the barn, a small island of life in a vast sea of loneliness, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than emptiness in my chest. It was a flicker of something, a flicker of life, of purpose, and that scared me more than any gunman or wild beast ever could. A man who has nothing to lose. But a man who finds something, even a glimmer of hope in a bleak world, risks having it all taken away again. And I had already lost too much. I spent the night with the rifle in my hands, a cold comfort against the weight of my past. Every creak of the barn, every rustle of the wind, every shadow that moved in the moonlight made my blood run cold. I was no longer just a man on my own land. I was a guardian, a protector of 3 strange women who had stumbled into my life and turned it upside down. The moon hung fat and silver over the ranch, casting long shadows across the yard. The night sounds of the desert surrounded me, coyotes calling in the distance, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. From the barn came low voices, the sisters talking among themselves. I'd given them space after supper, sensing they needed time alone. But curiosity and concern drew me from the house, not to eavesdrop exactly, but to keep watch. That's what I told myself as I settled onto an old crate near the barn door, far enough away to give them privacy, but close enough to hear if there was trouble. "We can't keep running forever," Clara was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. We're exhausted, Delia. Evangeline can barely keep food down, and you haven't slept properly in weeks. And what would you have me do? Delia's voice was tight with frustration. Wait for him to find us? You know what he'll do. Maybe we should have stayed and fought from the beginning. This from Evangeline, surprisingly. Maybe if we'd told someone. Told who? Delia's laugh was bitter. Sheriff Lawson? He's been in Croft's pocket for years. Judge Miller? He owns him too. Face it, Evangeline. There was no one to tell. Croft. I filed the name away. So, their pursuer had a name. At least that's not what I meant, Evangeline said quietly. I meant maybe we should have told someone what really happened that night. About Mama. The silence that followed was heavy with grief. I found myself holding my breath, the knife still in my hands. Telling wouldn't bring her back, Delia said finally, and it would have gotten us killed alongside her. We should tell him, Clara said suddenly. Lucas. He deserves to know what he's risking. Delia's response was immediate. The less he knows, the safer he island. You think Croft cares about that? Clara challenged. You think he'll just tip his hat and ride on when he finds out we've been here? You've seen what he does to anyone who helps us, which is why we leave tomorrow. You said 3 days. I lied. I heard movement, footsteps pacing. I'm tired of running, Clara said. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at every sound, and I'm tired of watching you carry this alone, Delia. I'm the eldest. It's my responsibility. We're not children anymore. Clara's voice rose, then dropped again. I can handle a gun as well as you. Better, maybe. And Evangeline's stronger than you think. I know exactly how strong Evangeline is, Delia said softly. I was there when Croft. Don't. Evangeline's voice was sharp. Don't talk about it. Not yet. More silence. I shifted slightly, trying to ease a cramp in my leg, and my boot scraped against the wooden crate. The voices in the barn stopped immediately. Who's there? Delia called out, and I heard the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. Just me, I said, standing slowly and stepping into the moonlight where they could see me. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check on the horses. The barn door opened and Delia emerged, indeed holding a pistol, a Remington .44 by the look of it. She lowered it when she saw me, but didn't holster it. How long have you been there? Long enough, I admitted. Croft. That's who you're running from. Delia's jaw tightened. Behind her, Clara and Evangeline appeared in the doorway, their faces pale in the moonlight. You should go back to the house, Delia said. Forget what you heard. Can't do that. I moved closer, noting how Clara's hand had drifted to her hip where a knife handle protruded. So, they were all armed. Good. A man named Croft killed your mother, and now he's hunting you. That about right? The sisters exchanged glances. Finally, Clara spoke. Close enough. Why? Because we saw it happen, Evangeline said, her voice barely above a whisper, and because we ran instead of letting him do to us what he'd done to her. I felt something cold settle in my gut. I'd known men like this, Croft, men who thought their money and power gave them rights to whoever they wanted. He forced himself on her. She fought, Delia said, her voice steady, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. She always was a fighter, but he was stronger. And when she kept fighting, she couldn't finish. He killed her, Clara said flatly. Beat her until she stopped moving. Then he turned to us and said we'd be next if we didn't cooperate. So we ran, Evangeline added. That night, took his horse and what money we could find and ran. He's been chasing us ever since, Delia finished. 5 months now. Every town we stop in, his men show up within days. We've been living like animals, hiding, stealing when we had to. We're not criminals, Mr. Blackwood. We're just trying to survive. I studied them in the moonlight. 3 women driven to desperate measures, carrying the weight of their mother's death and their own narrow escape. No wonder Delia watched every shadow. No wonder Evangeline jumped at sudden sounds. No wonder Clara met the world with defiance. This Croft, I said slowly, big man, owns a lot of land. Half of Dustfall County, Clara confirmed. Maybe more by now. He's been buying up properties, forcing out smaller ranchers, those who won't sell. She shrugged, but the implication was clear. I nodded thoughtfully. I'd heard of such men, land barons who built their empires on blood and fear. And the law is his, Delia said bitterly. Bought and paid for. Think you can handle us all? Clara asked suddenly, echoing her words from that first night. But now I understood the weight behind them. This wasn't just about giving shelter to 3 women. This was about standing against a man who killed with impunity, who had the law in his pocket and an army of hired guns at his disposal. Yes, I said simply. Clara blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct answer. Just like that. My father used to say that evil flourishes when good men do nothing, I said. Been doing nothing for 3 years now, hiding out here, keeping to myself. Maybe it's time that changed. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. The air was heavy, not just with the threat of violence that lingered like a storm cloud waiting to break, but also with the unspoken weight of our shared pasts. Each of us carried scars that were not always visible, yet they marked us as clearly as any brand or bullet wound. I had seen that look in their eyes before, the same look of loss, of weariness, of grief, worn so long it had become another layer of skin. It was the same hollow stare that I met in the mirror every morning, the one that reminded me of everything I had lost and everything I still refused to surrender. We were all broken, each in our own way, but in that shared brokenness there was something strange, something unexpected. Instead of weakness, it bred resilience. Instead of despair, it gave us a bond. In those quiet, tense hours, I realized that the 4 of us, once strangers bound only by circumstance, had begun to form something that resembled a family, or at the very least, a unit strong enough to stand against the world. I was no longer just a lone cowboy drifting between regret and survival, and they were no longer just 3 desperate women fighting to outrun a past that hunted them. Together, we had become something else, a small, defiant fortress, braced against the storm of men and fate that tried to crush us. And in that unity, I felt a surge of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, something dangerous but undeniable. Purpose. It rose up in me like fire through dry grass, frightening in its intensity but necessary if we were to endure what lay ahead. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of work, vigilance, and unspoken hope. Every dawn brought the same ritual: a quick scan of the horizon, a tightening of grips around rifles, and the silent prayer that today would not be the day Croft returned. Then came the labor reinforcing the ranch's defenses with whatever timber, stone, or scrap we could scavenge. The place that had once been little more than a husk of the past began to transform under our collective hands. Delia, sharp-eyed and tireless, took to planning our strategies with the precision of a general. She studied angles of approach, counted supplies, and sketched defenses in the dirt like it was second nature. Clara, practical to the bone, busied herself with repairing what little equipment we had left, mending tack, oiling hinges, sharpening blades. And then there was Evangeline. Frail in body but not in spirit, she did what she could. Sometimes it was tending to small chores, other times it was simply being present, her quiet steadiness grounding us when nerves threatened to unravel. The domestic roles they had once pretended to play to fool potential attackers into thinking this place was just another harmless household began to shift into something real. The laughter, the cooking, even the quarrels, they all stopped feeling like acts. They became a life. One afternoon, while the sun hung high and the horses stamped restlessly in the corral, I found myself staring longer than I should have. Clara was working with the animals, her auburn hair escaping its pins, strands sticking to the sweat that glistened along her collarbone. She moved with an ease that made me forget, for a dangerous moment, the peril pressing in on us. "You're staring," she said suddenly, catching me in the act. "Just thinking," I answered, not bothering to look away. "Dangerous habit," she teased, moving closer, her eyes carrying that familiar spark of challenge. "What about?" I hesitated only a second. "About how different this place feels with you 3 here." Her expression softened, the teasing melting into something more vulnerable. Different good or different bad? Good, I admitted quietly, though I probably shouldn't say so. Why not? Because when this is over, I said, my voice rougher than I meant, you'll leave, and then I'll have gotten used to this. Her fingers brushed mine on the fence rail, the touch light but steady. Who says we're leaving? That evening, as the sun dipped and shadows stretched long across the valley, we gathered for supper. The air carried more than the usual weight of watchfulness. There was a charge to it, a tension threaded with something warmer. Evangeline had baked bread burned badly on one side, but I ate it anyway, and she smiled, gratitude softening the tired lines of her face. Delia had dug out my mother's recipe box, attempting a stew that came out more salt than substance, but we ate it just the same. Clara had added wild onions from the field, their sharp bite cutting through the heaviness. We're terrible at this, Delia laughed, tasting the too salty stew. It was the first time I had heard her laugh freely, not the brittle, defensive sound she usually gave. The sound transformed her face, made her look younger, lighter. You're learning, I said, forcing another spoonful down. Besides, I've eaten worse. Liar, Clara said fondly, but a sweet one. As night fell, we took up our usual posts, rifles ready, eyes scanning the darkness. For once, it stayed quiet. The silence stretched, broken only when Evangeline spoke softly. Tell us about your family, she said. You know our story, but we know so little of yours. I hesitated, but their expectant faces pulled the words from me. I told them about my father, a stern man hardened by war, who had come west, chasing space enough to forget. I spoke of my mother, gentle but resilient, who turned this harsh land into a home. Then I told them of Tom, my younger brother, always laughing, always in trouble, always depending on me to drag him out of scrapes. The cholera came through in '74, I said, my voice low. Tom went first. Fought it for a week, but he was slight. Couldn't hold on. Pa followed 2 days later. Ma, she tried to nurse them, wore herself down to nothing. After they were gone, she just gave up. I'm sorry, Evangeline whispered. Don't be, I said. They're at peace. It's the living that carry the weight. Is that why you stayed here? Delia asked. Carrying the weight. Partly. But also, I couldn't see the point of leaving. This was home. Even empty. It was still home. Not empty anymore, Clara said firmly. The words lingered in the air, heavy with possibility. But before anything more could be said, Delia stiffened, her eyes sharp. Riders, northwest. We scrambled, weapons ready, hearts thudding, only to discover a false alarm, a group of drunken cowboys heading toward town, singing off-key. The tension broke all at once, leaving us laughing nervously in their wake. I need some air, Clara said suddenly, rising from the table. I'll come with you, I offered, grabbing my rifle. Just to be safe. Oh. We walked together to the corral, the night air cool against our faces, the stars blazing sharp and bright above us. Clara leaned against the fence, gazing upward, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. I used to dream of a life like this, she murmured. A ranch, horses, honest work. Before Croft destroyed everything. You could still have it, I said carefully. Here. She turned, the moonlight catching in her eyes. Is that an offer? Maybe, I admitted, my throat tight. With you? She stepped closer, so close I could feel her warmth, the faint scent of sweat and earth and wild onion clinging to her skin. I might, she whispered. Clara, I began, but she pressed her fingers against my lips. I know what you're going to say. We're in danger. This isn't the time. You barely know us. All true. But, Lucas, we might not have tomorrow. Croft could come at dawn with 50 men, so why not take what happiness we can tonight? And then she kissed me, fierce, sweet, desperate. My rifle clattered against the fence as I pulled her closer, the kiss shattering years of loneliness like glass. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive, like a man waking from a long sleep, pulled back into a world that might still hold meaning. Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." The scent of dust and hope was a strange mix, dry on the tongue and sharp in the lungs, but it was all I could smell now. The desert carried it, swirling around us in restless gusts, settling into our clothes, our hair, our very bones. Croft was coming, we all knew it. The knowledge wasn't spoken much anymore. It didn't have to be. His shadow loomed in every choice we made, in every look we exchanged. For weeks, fear had stalked us like a cold and constant companion. It lingered in the corners of every room, breathed in the silence before dawn, and haunted the space between heartbeats when the night grew too still. But something had changed. That fear, heavy and suffocating as it once was, had been pushed aside by another emotion, something warmer, bolder, almost defiant. It wasn't just the desperate need to survive anymore. It had become a promise, a whispered vow carried on the wind. This fight wasn't just about making it through the night. It was about a future, about choosing to stand, to claim something that was ours, no matter how much blood the ground demanded. The days leading up to his return had settled into their own rhythm, a strange mix of preparation and intimacy. We worked by day, side by side, repairing fences, stacking ammunition, digging firing lines, bracing doors. By evening we cooked together, sat around a lamp, or simply shared the silence, listening to the desert breathe outside our walls. It was a fragile kind of life, balanced on the edge of war, but it was still life. In those fragile moments, I found a kind of peace I hadn't known since before. The cholera took everything from me. Not the peace of solitude or surrender, but one rooted in shared purpose, in belonging. We were not bound by blood, but by choice, and that made us stronger. The hours before sunrise were always the longest. Every night I sat with the others, watching shadows stretch and shiver, my rifle balanced across my knees, each minute dragging out into an eternity. The mind plays tricks when darkness presses too close, every rustle a threat, every whisper of wind a warning. We had become a small fortress against the dark, and still the dark pressed back. Then came the morning that changed everything. The sky had just begun to pale, the faintest hint of silver breaking along the horizon, when Clara, her sharp eyes scanning the distance, stiffened. A dust cloud. At first, it was no bigger than a smudge against the far ridges, but it grew, steadily, undeniably. My stomach knotted as I realized the truth. Croft wasn't playing at intimidation anymore. He was bringing everything. "They're here," Delia said quietly, her jaw tight. I stood, rifle in hand, and called out to the defenders. My voice carried steady and hard, though my blood was pounding. "Remember, make every shot count. Don't waste ammunition on bad targets." The first strike came not in a rush, but in cautious bursts of gunfire. Croft's men testing our defenses, throwing sparks before the firestorm. I held my fire, waiting, letting their confidence build. Beside me, Evangeline breathed steadily, the shotgun braced against her shoulder. Her frail body shook slightly, but her eyes were steel. Then Croft himself appeared, riding at a distance, his coat dark against the rising Sunday. He didn't come close, not yet. Instead, he cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted across the space between us. "Last chance, Blackwood. Send them out and everyone else walks away." Before I could answer, Clara's voice rang sharp and fearless from the barn. "Go to hell." Croft's smile was a thin slash across his face. He raised his hand high, then dropped it. The world exploded. Gunfire ripped through the morning air, shattering glass, chewing into wood, splintering walls. His men charged, a wave of dust, shouts, and gun smoke. My body moved without thought. Aim, fire, work the lever, fire again. The rhythm was brutal, mechanical, but effective. Each man who fell bought us another heartbeat. Beside me, Evangeline's shotgun thundered. A man who had pushed too close to the porch staggered backward, clutching at the ruin of his chest. The barn, Delia's voice cut through the chaos. "They're trying to flank us." I saw them, two figures darting between shadows, using the barn for cover as they angled toward a side window. "Hold your positions," I barked, grabbing the spare rifle. Then I broke cover, sprinting out the front door, rolling behind the water trough as bullets whined past my ears. From there, I had the angle. One shot. One man dropped. Another shot, and the second crumpled into the dirt. But more were coming. Shadows spilling into existence like the desert itself was birthing them. "Lucas!" Delia's warning rang out just in time. I spun, firing from the hip. The bullet caught a man mid-stride, dropping him only feet away. My chest heaved, lungs burning, but there was no time to think. The fight raged on, each second stretching into a lifetime. It felt like hours, though it could not have been more than minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. What remained of Croft's force broke, scattering into the desert, their horses' hooves thundering as they fled into the horizon. I stayed crouched behind cover, counting heartbeats, waiting for the trick, the feint, the inevitable second wave. Silence answered. Finally I stood and called out, "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Delia replied, her voice strained but steady. "Some cuts from glass, nothing worse." One by one, they emerged. Clara had a graze on her arm, blood streaking down but shallow enough not to matter. Evangeline's hands were bleeding from shattered glass, but her grip on the shotgun never wavered. We regrouped inside the house, lighting a single lamp, its glow fragile against the darkness. Outside, the yard was littered with bodies, sprawled across the dirt that had once been quiet ground. "Croft will come himself now," Delia said, her eyes hard, "with everything he's got left." "Isn't." "I know," I answered, methodically reloading my rifle. Each click of metal against metal was a promise, but he'll find more than he bargained for. Clara laughed then, wild and unrestrained, her voice rising like a battle cry. "Think you can handle us all, Blackwood?" she asked, echoing the teasing words she'd spoken once before. But this time, her tone carried something fierce, something unstoppable. "Together?" I looked at each of them, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, their eyes blazing with something greater than fear. These women, these fierce souls, had turned my lonely existence into a cause worth dying for. Together we can handle anything. Evangeline surprised us all then. Her voice, usually soft, rang firm and clear. "Then we make our stand. No more running. This is our home now. Our home." The words settled deep into my chest, heavy and solid, like an anchor driven into stone. Not a wish, not a dream, an oath. Outside, the desert wind carried away the last wisps of gun smoke. The stars above burned cold and bright, silent witnesses to what we had become. This was no longer just a refuge, no longer a way station for the lost. The ranch had transformed into a fortress, and within its battered walls, 3 sisters and 1 solitary man had found something greater than survival. We had found a reason, and Croft with his empire of fear, his hunger for control, his endless cruelty, was about to learn what happens when you corner people who finally have something worth fighting for. The desert was vast, and the night long, but for the first time, I believed the dawn could bring more than blood. It could bring a future, and we were ready to fight for it. If you're watching on television, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. The air was finally clean, scrubbed by the mingled scents of gunsmoke and dust, the residue of a battle that had left its scars on the land and on us. That first breath of silence afterward was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the hollow, empty silence of grief, the silence I had lived with for years as I walked through the ruins of my own life. No, this was different. It was a silence alive with possibility, a quiet charged with the promise of a future. After the dawn skirmish, Croft pulled back to the ridgeline and vanished from the county 2 days later. Croft was gone. His empire of fear, once spread like a shadow across the county, was collapsing with every passing day. Men who had once served him out of terror or greed were scattering, some running for the border, others turning to the bottle, and a few even trying to make honest work of themselves. But even as we stood in the ashes of his defeat, I knew his downfall was only the beginning. A new life was rising from the wreckage, and with it came questions bigger than bullets and bloodshed. For the first time in years, survival wasn't the only thing. Now there was the matter of living, of learning to trust joy again, of finding purpose beyond keeping the wolves at bay. I realized how long I had spent building walls, stacking stone upon stone until I had thought myself safe inside. Yet those walls had been nothing but a prison. Standing beside these three women, who had risked everything to fight not just Croft, but despair itself, I understood the truth. My purpose had never been to hide from the world or to hold it at arm's length. It was to build something within it, something lasting, something tender, something strong enough to carry love. The days that followed had a new rhythm, steady and grounding. We rebuilt the ranch, yes, but we were also rebuilding ourselves. Each nail driven, each fence mended, each furrow plowed was an act of healing, as if the land itself was responding to our determination to start anew. Where once the yard had been scarred by violence, it now echoed with laughter. Where once the house had seemed a mausoleum of memory, it now rang with voices, light spilling from its windows into the dark. As the months passed, our lives blossomed in ways I never thought possible. Delia, with her fierce intelligence and unshakable will, stepped into a role she had been born to fill. She managed the ranch's business with a shrewdness that turned our modest operation into something thriving. She studied ledgers by lamplight, negotiated with traders, and kept the accounts in a way that made our hard work count for something more than bare survival. Under her guidance, the ranch stopped being a lonely, holding on the edge of nowhere. It became an enterprise respected and sought out across the county. Clara, with her intuitive understanding of animals, soon gained a reputation that traveled far beyond our fences. Horses that no one else could handle, she gentled with a quiet patience and firm hand. Word spread quickly. There was a woman at Dustfall Pass who could speak to horses as if she had been born in their skin. Ranchers brought their wildest stock to her, and she tamed them one by one, her confidence radiating like sunlight. I had once thought of her as fire-bright, dangerous, untamed. She was that still, but she was also something more. She was steady, a keeper of life's pulse, her connection to the land and animals grounding all of us. Evangeline, whose frailty had once seemed like a shadow ready to claim her, transformed in a way none of us expected. She began teaching the local children to read and write, setting up lessons first at the ranch kitchen table and then in a small schoolhouse we built together from lumber and sweat. The school became a gathering place for families scattered across miles of hard country, a beacon of hope in a land that had always valued brawn over books. Watching her stand before those children, her voice clear and her face alight, you would never guess she had once been the most fragile among us. She had found her calling, and in that calling, she found strength. And me? My own purpose shifted in ways I never saw coming. I had thought my role would always be the protector, the man with the rifle at the ready, the one who stood between danger and those he cared for. But slowly, I came to see I was more than that. I was a partner, a lover, a friend. The women did not need a guard. They needed someone who would stand beside them, share in their burdens, and laugh with them when the work was done. My life, once defined by loss and vengeance, began to take on a new shape. I had found love in this rugged land, not the fleeting passion of lonely hearts, but a steady, enduring flame that promised more than the next sunrise. The quiet life I had once longed for was no longer solitary. It was filled with laughter, with the clatter of hooves in the yard, with the shouts of children running from Evangeline's school to the corral to see Clara's latest horse. It was filled with Delia's voice calling out figures from her ledger, teasing me about the cost of nails or the price of cattle. It was filled with Clara's laughter, sharp and sudden, and Evangeline's softer, musical smile. This Wild West love was a healing balm, proof that even in the most desolate of places, something beautiful could grow if only you dared to tend it. So we worked, we built, we healed. The ranch became something far greater than a home for us alone. It grew into a beacon for others. Travelers came not just for trade, but for counsel, for help, for a place to start over. People who had been beaten down by the world found here a chance to rise again. Our home, once just a lonely refuge, became a symbol. It stood for peace, for second chances, for the stubborn belief that life could be better than what had come before. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. I often caught myself standing at the edge of the porch at dusk, watching the horizon, listening to the wind sweep across the open land. And in those moments, I thought of all the ways my life had turned, the winding road that had carried me